Baby, we are so back. We are so back. I want to start this episode off by saying if you hear this noise, I'm sorry, but after living without a freezer for 2.5 years, I just got a freezer. So I will be sipping iced lattes throughout all of these episodes, and you will have to deal with that. Hello, and welcome back to a brand new episode of DELOULOU. I kind of stopped this podcast for a hot minute. Like we were out. We were definitely out, but I'm here to tell everyone that we're back in. And we're so back in with a few changes and a different approach, I would say. I did 10 episodes, I think, of the pod last year. And I really, really enjoyed it. However, I started noticing pretty early on that there were things that worked well and there were things that didn't work so well. And after collecting feedback from others and also like going back to reflect on what I want to do, how I feel about all of this, I decided to make a few bigger changes. As you noticed, I'm speaking English right now. And that was one of the biggest things where I really was like, okay, I think I need to do this, even though most people who were like regular listeners specifically told me not to do it. But I gotta go with my gut here. I really have to like make this my own. And I think it would be a bit crazy to stick with German when that's a language that not a lot of people speak globally. I feel like that's just the first major reason. But also looking at the media landscape and the social media landscape, I think it's quite apparent why I wouldn't ever want to be a part of like the public media landscape in Germany. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Like I've always admired Naomi John for doing this because I was always like, yeah, because she was, I believe, living in Hanover, but you would have never known that. Like she could have lived in Southern California for all I know, because she was just doing her content in English. And since it also was content that was like more common in the US, I think it made sense. But to me, just in general, I'm like, I just don't really like what's happening on social media in Germany. Just in general, I felt like it was time to switch over. My friend Zoe, who has the podcast Low-Key Chaotic, which I can only recommend to everyone, also kind of asked me like, who exactly are you trying to reach in the long run? And if the answer is not exclusively people in Germany, don't do it in German. And she said that to me ages ago. And, you know, if things really don't apply to you, they won't bother you. And if a thought keeps bothering you, that's a sign that you also believe there's some truth to that. I'll also touch on that later on. But that was kind of the sign for me where I was like, okay, I think we're onto something here. I think we're going to do this in English from now on. And also, I just like doing content in English. I just don't know why, but I do. And that's why we're going to stick with that for the moment. So I don't know what it is, but I feel like as soon as I switch over to English, some part of me is unleashed that is less ashamed and like less afraid to be cringy. And that is why we're changing it. That's why we're changing it. Because you know what? Who's going to tell me not to? I'm just going to change the approach halfway through, and that's okay. And that's okay. I really just in general still love the podcast format, and I'm still super scared of having my personal stories out there. So this episode is kind of a celebratory episode. I'm super, super happy that I finally have my name changed on all of my government documents because, as you may know, I'm non-binary, which means that I do not identify with either of the binary genders and sexes, male and female. And that also means that I am on the trans spectrum. I am not cisgendered. And that comes with many repercussions, obviously. That has many drawbacks in a cis heteronormative world. So one of these drawbacks is that the name on your ID isn't necessarily a name that you identify with, and that also might take you decades to find out. And I kind of want to talk about this today. I want to talk a little bit about how I figured out what was going on and what resonated with me in this whole conversation. And I think to start that conversation off, we have to start really early on because my journey with my gender identity definitely started with my journey with sexuality. The topic of sexuality was a bit more apparent to me growing up than gender because I had to unlearn a binary concept of gender first, and that took me a long time to do. I think I only got around to that when I was 14 or 15, I believe. It took me a while, but I knew that I was into men super early on. If you gave me and my parents a list of all the stereotypes about gay men, you could have probably checked off each and every one of those by age 10, 11, maybe. A lot of them sooner. Like, I was a very flamboyant kid. I was always a bit effeminate. And now I know more about how the melody in your voice and the way you talk is influenced by the people you're around as a kid. And now I know that I was just more influenced by the women in my life when it came to my voice and the way I talk. And that still applies today, obviously. I mean, it's a concept often known as like gay voice. And, I definitely had and have gay voice. I think my voice has changed over the years, definitely. But I mean, as a kid, I talked pretty faggy, and that's okay. Like, that was cute. And I remember having crushes on boys in kindergarten, all throughout elementary school, and then when I got into secondary school, that also was the case. So I knew that something was up very, very early on. I kind of got lucky when it came to being around queer people because since my mom is a singer and used to be a musical theater actress, there were gay men around. Like, just in general, it wasn't a super strange concept to me. I recently remembered that I, at 7 or 8 years old, asked my babysitter what it was called when two men fell in love with each other and also what it was called when two women fell in love with each other. So I think there was a curiosity very, very early on. I got lucky because I was able to kind of get education on that to some extent, because obviously I grew up in Bavaria. Sex ed is not really that inclusive in Bavaria, I would say. Like, I definitely don't remember any mentions of anything that wasn't cis and hetero in school. I don't remember that at all. That education, on one hand, was just the exposure to queer people in general, like that I knew of them and knew they existed. And I mean, in German TV, it was also very, very minimal, I would say. Like, I knew there was one drag queen back then in the 2000s that was already a TV star, also, Olivia Jones, who was like the only person that I knew in German pop culture who was a drag queen. And then I think the next drag performer that I kind of got to know on a larger scale was Conchita Wurst when she won Eurovision. And then I also was one of those kids who had unregulated access to the internet very, very early on. Like, I got my first smartphone at age 8 or 9. And from there on out, I kind of was just able to Google things. And I was a Google kid. Like, Google was really, back then, just my superpower because I really loved researching stuff about history and like people and whatever. And I think I got right into the golden age of YouTube, especially because it was such a gay awakening on YouTube back then, like just culturally, because there were these coming out videos that were starting to show up. So I remember watching Tyler Oakley and Troye Sivan and Tom Daley coming out back then. So that was all a part of my education about being gay, right? Like, what they were talking about, how they realized it, and also how they went through these different stages while accepting their own sexuality. And that kind of meant I got to start that journey very, very early on. And I think it was in fifth grade when I was 11 that I stood in front of a mirror for the first time and said, I'm gay. And kind of realized, okay, this is going to be an issue for the rest of my life. This isn't going to go away. And that's okay. Like, I, for the first time, kind of accepted that it was just me and it was the way I felt. And that's all right, you know? Of course, it was still scary because it was this thing that nobody was allowed to know about. I was super, super scared of anyone finding out. And then I got into a friend group of older students in my school. That meant I was around people who were a bit more mature emotionally and were a bit more empathetic and a bit more educated about these things. And I just got lucky to be in a group of girls where they really were supportive of me. And I came out to them just after turning 12, I believe. And it was all right. And they all were just fine with it. And I think that kind of was a really great first stepping stone for me to accepted myself truly. On top of that, I definitely was involved in a lot of fandom communities. Like, I was in a lot of fan communities around bands, and we used to meet up on Sundays and just hang out around town and listen to music together and everything. That also was a huge safety net in my life, but it also forced me to come out again and again and again, and by that it got less daunting and scary every time. I think it's really interesting that as a queer kid, you develop this sixth sense about who you can tell and who you can't, and it's just like super intuitive. You just know that there are some people who will be fine, and then there are others who won't be fine. And that kind of develops early on, and it just stays. And that was definitely, at least for me, that's how it felt, and that's kind of what happened. I started watching Drag Race when I was around 13, I believe, because I started watching Drag Race when season 7 was still airing. I started watching pretty late in the season, but I still remember, I definitely remember that one of my first episodes that I saw was the ball with Kennedy and Katya lip syncing against one another to Roar by Katy Perry, and I was so stunned by that. I remember watching that episode like it's the Super Bowl. I was like, oh my God. That's just some of the most amazing clothing and performance I've ever seen in my life. Like, this is great. And to be honest, Drag Race definitely changed a lot for me because after season 7 aired, I think it took a year until Trixie and Katya started doing their web series. Trixie and Katya are two drag queens that were both competing on Drag Race season 7, which is such a weird name for a show, by the way, but I still think it's so iconic. Was a web series where they kind of took apart topics episode by episode. So every week there would be a 10 to 15-minute episode about, I think some of my favorite episodes are the weather, straight people, drag show etiquette, lying. Like, there are so many good episodes, but they were just talking about a topic for like 10 to 15 minutes. Jeff and Ron, the editors of that show, did a crazy amazing job of making it the most hilarious show in the world. Like, I was crying of laughter every single episode because it was so genius. It was so funny. And that kind of became sort of a compass through life, which is so ridiculous. When you watch the show, it's just unhinged. But I started watching that at 13, and it kind of desensitized me to a lot of things that just weren't scary anymore because I had already heard about it there. And I feel like for the average 13, 14-year-old, I was definitely maybe a bit too desensitized about a lot of things. Overall, I'm still glad that that show existed because in that whole era, there were so many queer people online that were just like really loud and voicing their opinions and were talking about things and were giving like cultural context to me. Like, I was watching so many movies and researching so much stuff that they were talking about that I didn't understand. So kind of, I think that was just so helpful to have that pool of like knowledge that was in there somewhere, because it's comedy, but there was a lot of truth to be found in there. Then at the same time, it was the major boom of beauty YouTube. Like it was the golden era, like 2015, 16, 17. It was that golden era of James Charles, Jeffree Star, Tati Westbrook, Laura Lee, Gabriel Zamora, Nikita Dragon, Manny MUA, Patrick Star, and of course Gigi Gorgeous. Which Gigi Gorgeous was, I think, the first trans story that I really followed because it happened so publicly, her whole transition. And I had watched her videos pre-transition. So I was very into the whole story and very invested. And I was so intrigued, obviously, because I also wasn't sure if I might be trans because I didn't quite understand how I'm feeling in my body yet. I might be trans. I don't know yet. Let's figure this out, you know? And it was so, it was such a great resource for getting to know that process, even because that was so inaccessible before. And to see someone that you were already kind of in a parasocial relationship with go through all of that was very, very, very helpful and insightful back then. So that meant there was just this whole queer universe that happened on YouTube. And I was so invested and I was so interested in everything. And it was just my little world. It was kind of like a queer utopia, obviously, like as a white gay person, you know, like back then I identified as a gay male. And, you know, that was kind of the reason that, because I was in a very privileged position of being like a white gay dude back then. So I felt very represented in that space. I know that for like a lot of black queer people, that wasn't the case because there really wasn't any major black gay representation in that scene at that point. I think it's very fair to say that the beauty industry wasn't very intersectional or anything back then. But that whole universe made me want to be more out there more and more, you know, because I saw what's possible. I saw all these people creating these full glam looks all the time. And to me, that was so aspirational because I had started wearing makeup at age 11. I started wearing mascara and like black eyeshadow, and there was a purple glittery lip balm by Essence that I was so in love with back then that I used to wear. And I always looked super weird. Like it's just so wild to me the way that I looked because obviously I was so particular about how I wanted to look back then. And I remember specifically the numerous interventions that my parents had to have with me because of my haircut, because my haircut was just so out there. And to some extent, I'm like, well, let me live. And then on the other hand, I do totally understand that they were just like worried about me getting bullied, which was the case. So they were right about that. I just didn't tell them. I had a haircut that could only be described as Justin Bieber as a 55-year-old woman from Indiana getting Starbucks to yell at a blue-haired barista. Like it was very Justin Bieber as a Karen. And I rocked that haircut for so long. And it was crazy. Now looking back at it, because I recently found my passport again from when I was a kid, and I saw the haircut and I was like, girl, it was a bit crazy. I'm not gonna lie. It was a bit out there, but I mean, I honestly have a lot of respect for myself for pulling through with that haircut and just like pulling it off and just doing it. In 5th and 6th grade, I think I really started to dye my hair with colored hairspray. So at the drugstore, they had colored hairspray that was for carnival and for costumes. And they had it in blue, pink, and red, and I bought all 3 of them. And I kept changing my hair color like every day before school, depending on my outfit. And I recently have found photos of that, and it's just so iconic. I'm so sorry. I'm so conceited maybe, but it was iconic. Like, considering that it was 2014 and everyone at school looked so fucking boring, it was iconic. What can I say? Like, it was giving. I really had like, I don't know what it is in my whole body and my whole system, but there's like some it girl mentality buried in there that is just not afraid to look a mess, act a fool, and go crazy. Like, I'm just not intimidated by that. It's just like, I'm okay with that. Which is also kind of the reason that it makes sense that I keep doing shit online because I'm like, I'm just not scared of putting myself out there. Like, it just comes very natural and very easy to me to just be online and act a fool. Like, I just like that. Whatever. So, I definitely had that haircut as a big part of my self expression, and I was also wearing makeup. I definitely looked crazy. Oh my god, I also always used to wear, um, what are they called? In German, they're called Stulpen. I also always used to love wearing black fingerless gloves. That also used to be my thing. And then also, I was always rocking this pair of fake classic Ray-Ban sunglasses. And I just popped the lenses out and just wore I just wore the rest as an accessory, like as fake glasses, which is so hilarious because I literally wear fake glasses to this day. And I'm gonna die on that hill. More people should wear fake glasses because glasses are just sexy. Glasses look good. And I definitely had the experience in the last university that I was in prior to studying photography. Like, I was in a different university and I definitely felt like people were taking me way more seriously the moment I started to wear these fake glasses. And I'm just like, I'm just gonna put that out there. Fake glasses are just tea. It's just tea. I don't know. Like, some people are just so scared to surf cunt at all times, and I'm not scared of that. So I love fake glasses. Love them. And I've been wearing fake glasses for over 10 years now. So if you ever see me out there with the glasses, just know that they're not prescription. I just like to feel cute and wear glasses. It's just an accessory to me. Anyways, um, I had already been wearing makeup for a few years back then. And then that beauty YouTuber, beauty influencer era really started to go off. I just saw all of these videos and photos and I just thought I can do that. So I was practicing every day. Like, every day I would do a different look. I was spending all of my money that I earned like working on the side in the like during the holidays, and I was just spending all of it on makeup and brushes, like especially on all of these palettes back then. I remember it was so hard in 2016 to get Morphe in Germany. Oh my god, that was such a hassle, but I did it. I had a makeup account on Instagram where I was posting my looks every day. I went to school in full glam almost every day. I used to wear 6-inch high heeled ankle boots with red bottoms to school with a long black trench coat and a fake Birkin. Vinted was my thing back then. Like, I was so early in the game when it came to Vinted because in 2016 and like maybe a bit later, 2017, 18-ish, I was so into the Vinted game and I was buying these fake Birkins, fake Louis bags. I was just in my fake designer handbag era. I was just loving it. Like, I also had a counterfeit Chloe Faye bag. That was the one with the ring and the chain on the front. Still love that bag. To be honest, would still wear that bag. Anyways, and I think during that time, I got more desensitized to all of the hate that I could get. Because obviously, in a sort of conservative Bavarian town, I definitely felt like I was served on a platter for discrimination because I was very, very visibly queer. The experience was definitely crazy, but I felt very lucky because I was in a supportive environment. I went to boarding school, which made things a bit easier because I didn't have to take the train to school or anything. Like, I was just walking around on the premises. And I just knew that if someone beat me up on my way to school, because it was just like on the premises of my school, I just knew that they would get in more trouble. So I wasn't really scared. I really got to experience a few years of actually feeling safe going to school in full glam every day. However, there was something boiling inside of me because I faced so much backlash all of the time. Because obviously, even though people couldn't like beat me up or anything, I still got verbally assaulted all the time, and people were making fun of me. And I mean, I was pretty confident back then. However, like, if someone ridicules you, that still does something to you, if when you're 15 especially. So that kind of started to build up inside of me. And at the same time, I felt so weird in my body. Like I was just like, I actually don't know if I'm trans or not. Like I actually am so confused of what's going on. And I remember stumbling across a video where someone explained the term gender fluid. And I really was just so shook. Like I remember sitting there and my jaw was just open and I was like, "Oh my God. This makes so much sense. That whole term resonates so much with me." Viewing gender as a spectrum instead of a binary A or B experience just makes so much sense because at that point my life was dominated by the binary because I was in boarding school and all the boys lived on the first floor and all the girls lived on the second floor. So there was a literal physical divide between the genders in the building that I was living in. And that made it difficult for me to go through that experience of figuring it out. Like I live in a space where it's like either you're a boy or you're a girl, and that's it. And also, of course, when you're in school, so many things are separated into boys and girls. Like when we took trips as a choir, for example, it was separated into boys' rooms and girls' rooms. Or if we, obviously, all of PE class is always separated by gender. It was a bit difficult because I didn't feel like there was an actual space for me to go to with these concerns that I had and with these thoughts that I had. I got scared. I got really, really scared. And I think I kind of had a point where I just collapsed internally. And that was in February of 2019. It was so grim. Like thinking about it now, I'm so, so sad that I didn't feel confident enough in any of my relationships to my family or the prefects at boarding school to talk about this too. Because it was really just like from one day to the next, I decided I couldn't take all of the shame anymore. I couldn't take being ridiculed anymore. I couldn't take any of it anymore. I just decided it has to stop now. I cannot live this queer life anymore. It was just too much. And I just collapsed one night. Like I was up all night crying and being so ashamed of myself and just trying to play out these scenarios in my head of how I could be safer and how I could escape that situation. That was so scary just to begin with. To be in that situation of actually feeling helpless and not knowing where to go with emotional issues that you have. That is just always a really, really bad and dangerous place to be in. And funnily enough, I feel like what came next is also very much reflected by things that are happening in politics these days. Because I tried to escape that whole conversation that I had to have with myself by just conforming. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna follow the societal instructions to being a man, and by that, I'll be good. I'll be good. I won't have to worry about all of the gender crap. I'm just gonna let it go and conform and be a man. Okay. That's that was my plan. Obviously, that plan sucks. Like thinking back now, I'm like, girl, did you really think that that was gonna work? If that would have worked, you would have done it sooner, girl, but whatever. I, at that point, was like, okay, we're not doing the gender fluid thing anymore. We're just gonna be as straight passing as we can. So I got rid of all of my makeup. I remember sitting down late at night, taking photos of all my palettes and most of my products, and posting them on my Instagram story, I believe. And I was just saying, hey, does anyone want this? I'm giving this away. I got rid of all of my palettes, and there were so many palettes. Oh my God. I believe I had almost the whole BH Cosmetics lineup back then. I had everything. And multiple Morphe palettes. I had so much shit. Which the funny part is, some of my friends from back then are still using these palettes to this day. Like sometimes I go visit friends from high school and they'll be in the bathroom getting ready and I just see an old palette of mine. I know that my sister still has a palette from back then. It's so funny to me that these palettes actually are still around. But I had a full on mentee B, a little mental breakdown. Um, and I was selling everything. I was like either selling it on Vinted or I just gave it away for free. At that point, I was 16. I took some money that I had saved up and I took two friends of mine to a thrift store in Würzburg where I was living at the time. And we pretty much picked out a whole new wardrobe for me. Like, I think I bought, I remember buying two jackets and like five or six shirts and three or four pairs of pants, like something like that. And I luckily like I was always a person with very like consistent choices in sneakers, like very very classic silhouettes. I would say like I was just wearing sneakers that were cool at the time, so they were pretty neutral. So I didn't have to get any new shoes because in my own eyes, my shoes weren't too gay, which is so ridiculous saying it now. But I just kind of decided, okay, we're gonna become a skater boy now, visually. We're just gonna cosplay as a straight guy. So I had like all types of basketball shirts, which is so ridiculous because I'm like, why would you have shirts from multiple teams? That doesn't make any sense. But whatever. I had shirts of multiple teams. And, I was just like trying to, like, I don't know, I kind of was cosplaying as a straight guy. And it was really, really strange, but I did it and it worked, was the crazy thing. So much of the being harassed, so much of the ridicule and the harassment just stopped. It was just kind of gone. And I was so relieved by that. And on one hand, I'm looking back at it and I'm like, okay, well, maybe it kind of was good that that happened and that I just accepted there was a threshold that I had crossed, you know. And on the other hand, I'm like, I kind of hid. I just decided to hide from now on. Unfortunately, that period of time when I was trying to act as straight as I can was when I matched with my first serious boyfriend on Tinder. And I felt that all of the negative thoughts that I had about my femininity, namely, for example, oh, I'm so feminine, that's why nobody's gonna love me, and therefore I'm gonna be alone forever, so I need to change. And unfortunately, exactly in the moment when I did change myself, I found somebody who really, really liked me. And that, I think, made a neurological connection in my head that I'm still fighting off to this day. Because I really just made that connection of, okay, look, I'm acting straight now, and suddenly I have a boyfriend. That year with him definitely changed a lot, but over time, kind of became more confident in my femininity again. I remember dyeing my hair pastel pink, for example, started wearing a bit of makeup again. So I did kind of go back into some of my femininity, but I was just so busy being head over heels in love with this guy. It was my first time being in love, and I was just so obsessed with him. It was just a beautiful year, really. Like, it was a year filled with a lot of drama, but also just the most laughter I've ever had in my life. And it was good. Overall, it was really, really good. We separated the week the first lockdown was announced, which that was horrible. But, you know, that meant immediately after the breakup, I got to be on my own, locked up in my mom's apartment for a while. Then I at some point moved from my mom's apartment to my dad's place with my siblings and my stepmom and my dad, and we were having a really good time together as a family during COVID, because since our family situation is quite complicated, we hadn't lived together in a house like that in years. So it was really great for us to like reconnect as siblings. And during that time, I feel like the whole process of me figuring out my gender identity kind of took a back seat, because there was other, I kind of had bigger fish to fry, because I was trying to find a job. I was going to university for the first time. I was reconnecting with my siblings. There was just a lot of stuff to take care of. So that just kind of naturally took a back seat. In 2021, I moved out of my parents' house into a shared flat with two roommates. And when I moved out, I had so much freedom that just came over me. Like it was kind of like a moment of enlightenment in a way, where I was just like, oh my God, there's so much to explore and to do now that I'm more grown up and I have this apartment where I live. And there's so much I can do and try. And I just like have a room where nobody walks in and I'm like completely free. At that point, I started dabbling into makeup again. And that was a really, really important year for me, because I started hanging out with a few different friend groups. So my social circle kind of evolved. There were just different types of people around me all of a sudden, and that kind of broadened my horizon a lot. And since I was around so many really, really open-minded people, I just felt more comfortable testing out different things. And I also was kind of workshopping and test driving different variations of like my name, because at that point I had realized, okay, this whole more fluid and non-binary existence will not go away. When I was 18, 19-ish during lockdown, the term non-binary became more of a thing. It became more established, and I thought it was so great because it was an umbrella term for a plentitude of experiences, a plentitude of lived experiences. I thought that that was so great, because I was like, well, am I gender fluid? Am I demi-male? Am I agender? Like, which one of these concepts describe my experience the best? I wasn't sure. I wasn't really able to figure that out just yet. But I was so grateful for these terms existing. I was just so happy that I got to grow up in a time where these resources were out there and I could just look up the word demi-male. What does that mean? What exactly does that encompass? And it was so important for me in my growth to just, have these pillars that I could cling on to. And I know that non-binary is kind of a tough one for people, because it doesn't function in, are you in this drawer or are you in this drawer? It doesn't work that way. But that's exactly what I love about it, because I finally found a word and a term that describes my lived experience the best, because I have phases that last multiple months or years where I feel the most comfortable expressing myself very femininely, and where I identify as rather feminine. But I also go through the opposite. And the fun thing to me is, because I'm very into drag, I've always kind of thought of the way that we go through life as drag, because truly, we all curate clothes and different symbols in our lives to signify to others who we are. And that applies to people who wouldn't ever identify with that. Because that super, super conservative finance bro who is wearing a Rolex, driving a Porsche, who is wearing tailored suits and has a super clean haircut, and maybe has like an apartment at the Lago Maggiore in Italy and goes there every year. Something like that. Those are all things that that person chose to signify wealth and status and also masculinity through association to others. I am so sick and tired of everyone pretending that it's just queer people and non-binary people and trans people who form an identity through visual cues and clothing and makeup. Because that's not the case. We all do it. That's why it's so kitschy to quote RuPaul in anything. I think that RuPaul's autobiography, The House of Hidden Meanings, had so much intelligent reflection on that exact topic, on how after we're kids, we start learning what we need to signify that we're cool or that we're rich to others. Like, I remember when I was a teenager, it was so important to have a certain type of sneaker, and you couldn't just have any Adidas sneaker. You had to have Adidas Superstars or Stan Smiths. That was really important because those were the ones that were considered cool. And these concepts of distinction from others through clothing and through the way you look exist in every demographic, every single one. So I'm sick and tired of pretending that that's just like a gay thing, because it's not. It's really not. And I think we're all mature enough to accept that at this point. I love this clip of Monet Exchange's interview with Ziwei, where Ziwei is asking her if a certain person or politician is doing drag. Because I feel that there are a lot of world leaders out there that are doing full on drag, including the makeup, including the hair, including the performance art. Like, girl, some of that shit is drag. And to me, I'm so glad that drag exists, because I got to learn so much from that art form for my identity, because it gave me so much permission to try out different things. That now means that, for example, when I'm on stage as a DJ or, as a musician in any capacity, I love to be a bit more out there and more effeminate and flamboyant with my clothing and my choices. But in my everyday life, I really, really enjoy dressing rather traditional masculine. I really, really enjoy suits and trench coats and button-up shirts and loafers and all of these things, because I have an appreciation for the drag that is in there. And I think it's quite hard to explain sometimes, but to me, this performance of masculinity, especially for me, is just as much drag as it is for me to be somewhere in a long dress, a wig on, and full glam. To me, it kind of is the same, because I don't consider myself as starting on the male end of the spectrum. I really feel like I'm in the middle somewhere. And that is a bit hard to explain to people, but I hope that this episode is kind of giving you an understanding of how fluid it really is. Because I had these moments of breakdowns where I was trying to figure out an act of being a man. And I also was looking at all of these influencers online and trying to do a more feminine version of that. So I definitely went through these different stages to now end up somewhere where I'm like, I can really, depending on the day, just do anything. I'm just okay with anything. The term non-binary and adopting it as a self-descriptor in my life changed so much, because it started acting as a catalyst where it let me explore everything equally. I didn't have to feel the pressure anymore of fitting into one box. And that, to me, truly is the power of viewing gender as a spectrum, because there was so much pressure on me as a kid, literally as a 10, 11-year-old child, of deciding, oh my God, am I trans? Like, do I have to start transitioning because I'm so feminine? Like, I really felt so much pressure in that. And it scared the shit out of me back then, because I was aware enough of how a transition works that I knew as a trans woman that it can be really, really beneficial to start hormone blockers early on so you stop puberty for a while. And, I kind of felt pressured by that because I was like, oh my God, I have to figure this out because there's like a deadline. I should be doing this before then. And I was so happy when I first found that term gender fluid because that already kind of took the pressure out of that whole situation. I didn't feel like I had to figure out the am I a man or a woman situation anymore. And now, 10 years later, having really arrived in a non binary identity, I'm like so relieved from all of this. There is no pressure for me anymore to conform into either of these things, with the exception of hookup culture in the gay world. Like, that is still very, very, very icky. And that's not very welcoming to any type of femininity, but that's a whole nother story. In early 2022, I was in Berlin for a few days and I met up with Alba, a DJ and now very, very good friend of mine, to take some photos of her. And we were in her hotel room. She was getting ready and I was just hanging out in the room. And we were talking about this, and I was like, I don't know. I just don't want a name anymore that is considered male. I just really, really don't like being called by that name anymore because it is so male. Like, I'm just not comfortable with that anymore. I would love a more androgynous name. I had a friend who's also non-binary, and I'm still friends with him. And I was like, oh my fucking God, Leslie got so lucky because his name is just non-binary by nature. That is so nice. I kind of was a bit jealous of that. I don't know. Then I talked to Alba about it and I was like, I kind of missed back then during the height of my little monster and like just different fandoms era when everyone just called me Lou. And I was just like, you can go back to Lou though. Like, you could just change your Instagram name to Lou and then everyone will call you Lou and you can just tell people to call you Lou and they will do it. And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. You're kind of right. And I remember that day so well because something just clicked. And I was like, well, I guess my name's Lou. And it's so crazy because that was 4 years ago exactly. That was 4 years ago. So technically, the name Lou in my life is turning 4 right now. But on the other hand, I kind of see the birthday of that name really being on the 7th of November, 2025, because that's when I got my birth certificate changed. And that was such a huge step for me, going to the Standesamt, which I don't know what that is in English, sorry. And I got my birth certificate changed. And that was such a sigh of relief. And in Germany, we have 3 different gender markers: M for male, F for female, and D for diverse, or X for diverse, depending on the document. Now, my birth certificate says Lou as the first name and D as the gender. And I'm so happy that that is finally the case. That just felt so affirming and beautiful and was such a big moment. And I remember going into that office and walking up to my appointment. It had been raining for 2 weeks straight. It really, like, the whole November was so rainy. And then the moment I stepped up to the booth and sat down, the morning sun, flooded the whole room. And I have photos of that and I was like, oh my God, this feels so magical. And I kind of felt like I had arrived because I was really just like stepping up to the plate and I was really doing it for myself. That appointment was so exciting, but it was sadly followed by a few challenging months financially and spiritually and health-wise. And because of that, some of the next steps were moved further away and away and away, which meant that I only got my government ID with my new name very, very recently, like last Monday. And with that new ID, I could finally change my name at my health insurance, my banks, on everything. You have to change your name everywhere. It's such a huge paper trail behind a transition. It is crazy. If you think that getting married is difficult when it comes to documents, try transitioning. It is crazy. But I'm so glad because every step of the way feels affirming again. Like every time that the new document arrived, I'm like, oh my God, finally, this is amazing. Like even changing my PayPal link, I was like, oh my God, this feels great. Like I recently saw a meme where it was like trans people PayPaling each other money after dinner and immediately forgetting the dead name after. It was so funny. I thought it was so funny because that's really what the experience was like before. And I always felt so horrible about that. So I'm really glad that all of that is done. It's all done now. And I'm so happy about it. If there is one thing that I want you to take away from this, it really is don't be hard on people figuring out their gender identity. Because it is so complicated. And while you might think they're being dramatic, believe me, whatever they're thinking about themselves in all of that is 10 times worse. And they need some compassion. And they probably just need someone to tell them that it's going to be okay and they can figure it out. That truly is what I would have needed through all of this. And I'm really grateful for all of the support that I have gotten throughout this whole process of coming out multiple times, changing my name. I'm really, really happy and grateful to be in the place where I'm at right now. And just know that people definitely remember who stayed during this whole process. Like, you never forget who was super supportive of you throughout all of this. You just never forget it. I truly will never forget all of the messages and all of the supportive calls that I've gotten every time that a major change has happened in my life when it comes to coming out. And that's kind of, I think, where I want to end this on. Being queer is such a blessing, but it comes with so many challenges and so many stones that are put in your way. At the end of the day, we just want to live our lives and be left alone. I think the notion of there being some queer agenda and some goal of indoctrination is so goofy. I think that's so hilarious every time people bring it up. I really think it's funny because these conservatives are giving it a bit more credit than we should be given. Anyways, thank you so much for listening to this episode and for listening to my story. I think sharing this is kind of like the most powerful thing that I can do when it comes to this topic. So, yeah. Sending big hugs and kisses. Have a great week. Bye-bye.